Thank you, Speaker, and thank you, Minister, for his extensive discussion about our questions. I have three clarification questions for the Minister. The first is to ask if, in referring to the events of 2018-19, whether he continues to believe that there was indeed malign foreign state influence in that case, and if I appreciate the point that he raised, that we shouldn't outsource our national security to a private company. But by the same token, I'm sure he will appreciate that the tools available to a large and sophisticated internet company such as Facebook might indeed throw additional light into an issue. So for me, the question is, if so, doesn't this apparent disagreement already raise caution about how the competent authorities' suspicions may not always be correct? Or does the Minister believe that the MHA will always retain its own counsel on what it believes to be true? Now, my second clarification, has to do with the standards of suspicion embedded in the bill. May I ask if these always refer to the term reasonable suspicion, a point that I believe members Zulkarnain and Murali also mentioned? I ask this because, for starters, this wasn't codified specifically in this form in the bill. Second, and while we do have a long history of, as other members have said, using this term in case law, lest we forget the bill as it stands does exclude judicial review. So any such precedent strikes me as largely advisory and informative rather than binding. And third, I think it's worth remembering that the types of actions typically afforded by reasonable suspicion tend to be much more limited than those associated with probable cause. And that's part of the reason why, for me at least, this hurdle remains a little too low for establishing offense. And my last question has to do with whether the Minister continues to believe that there is a misunderstanding of the law by those who have raised reservations. And this is, I mentioned this because the reservations were because many scores of academics, activists, other lawyers, and have all scrutinized the bill and thought that the language was vague. So, for me, it seems like either the language is indeed vague, as claimed, and hence subject to misunderstanding, or it's not vague, in which case then these individuals shouldn't be accused of misunderstanding.
Let me try and deal with those points. On the first point, do we believe that there was a foreign state involved response? We believe it to be so. I think Mr. Lim's real point is, Facebook says there is no such thing. You say there is. Doesn't that throw into question your credibility or assessment? Now, let me try and give Mr. Lim some examples, or at least one example. At many stages in its career, Facebook has denied something only to come back and reverse itself. I'm not saying, therefore, they don't really mean what they say when they haven't seen any state attack. I also pointed out that Facebook is not the only medium. There are a variety of other medium other than Facebook, and I don't know if they've considered a complete survey. We were watching all the different media that was used. Now, in Sri Lanka, and I think this was 2017 or 2016, on Facebook, Sinhalese were calling to gather together to go and kill Muslims. The Minister for Communications in Sri Lanka called up Facebook to say, can you do something about this? This is a riot being organized on Facebook in order to kill other people. Facebook told him this does not affect our community standards. So I don't know, their definition of what is or is not a foreign hostile activity may well be different from ours. So if I organize a pogrom to go and kill people, that apparently doesn't breach Facebook's community standards. And Muslims were killed. Does Mr. Lim think that a responsible state authority should outsource the way it handles law and order to Facebook, whose primary concern is how much money it can make with the best will in the world? When someone took Nancy Pelosi's speech and redid it to make it look as if she was drunk and slurring, Facebook also felt that in the interests of free speech, that doesn't breach their community standards. When the attacker in New Zealand mosque was killing people and live streaming his attack, Facebook said it did not breach its community standards, and it felt that the attack should continue to be live streamed until there was such a furore and uproar that they reversed course. So I don't know. I don't know what their definitions are. I don't know what are the different types of medium they consider. So I can't comment exhaustively, nor can I take it at face value that if they say so, it must be so. Maybe they don't know what happened. But we noticed activity, we draw certain lines, we have intelligence experts, we have people, and they've come to the conclusion that this sudden spike in activity on a variety of platforms, specifically targeted for specific messages to be absorbed by our Mandarin-speaking population, was a very clear indication. And I'm not going into all the details. As I said, we are a price taker. We don't name countries. We can't afford to. Now, another question by Mr. Lim is, do I believe there is a misunderstanding by all those who have raised issues? Or is the language indeed vague? There are different points. I think in any debate, again, after long years of experience in Parliament, my view is on any debate, it broadly breaks out into some who are honest and they understand, a large group who don't follow very carefully and may have views which are not accurate. How many people read very closely? How many people look at bills? How many people look at even the detailed newspaper reports? And viewpoints tend to be impressionistic, and often impressionistic viewpoints tend to be inaccurate. But for good reasons. People have busy lives, and they have a limited bandwidth, and they absorb whatever they can absorb. I don't know about Mr. Lim, but if I wasn't doing this job and I was a lawyer in private practice, I would also have a very limited time to understand what's going on in Parliament, which bills are coming out. And I will probably have some sort of, perhaps a little bit more than the average lay person's understanding, but all our viewpoints tend to be impressionistic on areas that we are not directly dealing with, because we all have busy lives. And then there will be a small group which will go out to deliberately misinform and confuse the population. There will always be that group. And I've indicated that some of that has been happening too. Now, quite apart from that, on language, let me try and explain to Mr. Lim one more time. It is going to be 10 o'clock, but I'll try again. I said in my opening speech, I think I said, out of 10,000 people, you're trying to catch that one case. even in that one case, the foreign agency will try and make it look like it's a normal case. So the facade will be normal, everything will look normal. In fact, if they are worth anything, they will make it look very normal. So you have to have definitions which, just because it looks normal doesn't mean that you don't have the powers. How do you go behind that? How do you deal with it? So that is why you say it is to foreigners' involvement, affecting public interest. The way in which it is done, I have explained the framework. If the idea is hostile information campaign, foreign state agency, payments, covert activities, I think it's quite clear. But there are also situations where it's not so clear. And that's where you build in the proportionality test. And it seems to me quite a few of the commentators don't understand the proportionality test. That's why I made it a point to say AGC advised me. That test is there. And when you don't understand the proportionality test, then you say, oh dear, it says collaboration. So any collaboration with a foreigner on a matter that is of importance to Singaporeans could potentially run foul because you misunderstand the proportionality test. Beyond that, there is a second vein. Again, there are people who fall into those who deliberately push this line, but there are also a large number, genuine people, honest people, who are genuinely concerned. Now, I wouldn't say a large number of people are concerned with our bill, this bill. In fact, our assessment is that, by and large, a large number of people understand, a vast majority of Singaporeans understand the need for FICA. So of the very small group who are concerned, a significant number you can put down as honest people who, either for impressionistic reasons or other reasons, may have had some misunderstandings. And even those who support the bill, like the two NMPs who spoke up, say, is there a possibility of abuse? And that lies behind some of the points that have been made outside. Yes, if you apply the law as you say it should be, and if you apply the proportionality test correctly, yes, then it will be done properly. But what if you abuse your power? And my answer to that, I gave an extended analysis this morning about how abuse can take place under any legislation. Your question is, do you give the power, and what are the checks you put in? So we have put in, we think, a strong check through the appointment of a High Court judge with extensive powers. And we've crafted this to deal with a very large threat, which is present, clear and present here. It's not in the future. It's happened, it's happening all around us, and it will happen to us. It's not for nothing that the French study Singapore and show it as a test case or one of the case studies. So our task is to continue to explain to people how this law works, and over time, just as with the many other pieces of legislation, if the government operates it properly and honestly, it will be understood. If it operates it wrongly, the people will, express their views in a variety of ways. I think Mr. Pereira said, trust in institutions should be built up. I think listening to Mr. Pereira over the years, his ideal state, if you take the UK or the US, they have all the things that he says we should have. Freedom of Information Act. They have all these other bodies. Many things go to the courts. They don't have an Internal Security Act. Can anyone tell me why the trust in the Congress in the US, I think, is now down to perhaps single digits or maybe low double digits? Why is the trust in the government in Singapore so much higher? So let's again get real. Trust depends on how you exercise your power and your track record. Trust depends on whether people's lives have really improved and whether you work to improve people's lives. Trust depends on whether you have the courage of your convictions in the face of, some opposition to say, this is the right way, this is the way I will explain, and I will do it for the benefit of people. Trust doesn't depend on putting in a series of legislation, just copying others whose trust levels are abysmally low. Mr. Lim asked me about the phraseology, the authorization by Minister for Anticipatory Direction. I think the phrase used is suspect, so has reason to believe. Thank you.